There's a very specific legal term for what happens when a company markets a premium product, collects full payment, and then swaps in something inferior after the customer can no longer back out. It's called bait-and-switch fraud. In heavily regulated industries, accusations like that trigger federal scrutiny, class action lawsuits, and serious executive accountability. And on a Wednesday night in June 2026, the Indiana Fever front office appeared to treat that exact strategy like standard operating procedure. Welcome back to WNBA Pro. Today, we're conducting a full evidence-based breakdown of what is quickly becoming one of the most explosive institutional controversies of the entire 2026 WNBA season. This isn't speculation. This isn't emotional outrage. We're taking the Fever's own actions, their public statements, and their apparent failure to follow mandatory league reporting rules and placing them directly against the language of the WNBA collective bargaining agreement. Then we're letting the facts speak for themselves. Because if you've been consuming the carefully managed PR narrative surrounding Caitlin Clark missing the Portland Fire game, the talk of back management and precautionary rest, you've been fed a version of events that starts falling apart the second the timeline gets examined closely. So before anything else, let's establish the documented foundation. Because something inside the Fever organization clearly isn't adding up.
With Caitlin, and there is definitely something going on within the locker room of the Indiana Fever, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. Live On American Life stated he's just been sharing a bunch of shit all day. He stated this from bull stuff. It makes it even worse. If they shell scrub.
At the last possible moment, Caitlin Clark was removed from the active roster. Not just any player, the single biggest commercial engine in the entire franchise. The player driving national television interest, resale ticket prices, road attendance spikes, and massive merchandise sales across the league. Local media reports framed the move as responsible roster management tied to a back issue. But according to the WNBA's own reporting framework, that explanation immediately raises serious questions. Multiple analysts, including the widely discussed research from Fantasy Doctor, pointed directly to the league's collective bargaining agreement, which requires teams to submit official injury, illness, and rest designations by 5 p.m. local time on the day before a scheduled game. This isn't optional guidance. It's mandatory league policy with enforceable consequences. The only exception applies during the second game of a back-to-back. The Portland Fire matchup wasn't part of a back-to-back. Which creates one unavoidable question for the Fever front office and eventually, possibly, the league office itself. What exactly did the team's official injury report submitted before the Portland game say about Caitlin Clark?
For Caitlin, and wouldn't show up if they pulled this yesterday. They've lost the fans' trust for the third year in a row. Yes, they have. Now, during the time of me watching this game, I started looking at the stands. And in the stands, there was nobody there. Like, the game, it was.
Based on every available report, the answer appears to be nothing. No injury designation. No participation status. No official medical classification whatsoever. Caitlin Clark reportedly did not appear on the mandatory pre-game documentation designed specifically to protect consumers, betting markets, and traveling fans from last-second surprises. And the consequences of that omission weren't theoretical. Ticket prices for the Portland game remained elevated because fans believed Clark would play. Families drove across Indiana and neighboring states, booked hotels, paid for parking, bought merchandise, and committed entire evenings based on the assumption that the franchise's biggest star would be available. The money was collected. The tickets were scanned. The concessions were sold. And only after all of that happened did the announcement finally arrive. That timeline matters because it's exactly the scenario the reporting rules were designed to prevent. The league created those requirements so fans could make informed decisions before financially committing to an event. Which raises another uncomfortable question. Why would a franchise willingly risk league discipline instead of simply disclosing the information on time?
Of information about 1 p.m. local time on that day. So is they saying that the Indiana Fever is getting in trouble? Somebody said since this is a home game, they clearly did this to fleece their own fans. Damn. How do you feel, Indiana Fever? You like it when your team takes a fine to make people pack a home game under false pretense? Wow, is they
From a financial perspective, the math isn't difficult. Indiana Fever executives understand exactly how much revenue flows through Gainbridge Fieldhouse on game night tickets, parking, concessions, merchandise, everything. If Clark's absence had been disclosed at the required reporting deadline, each of those revenue streams likely would have taken a hit. Casual fans may have stayed home. Secondary market prices would have dropped immediately. Attendance numbers almost certainly would have softened. So the organization appears to have made a calculation. The cost of a potential league fine might be smaller than the financial loss tied to revealing Clark's absence early. And if that's true, this stops being a basketball decision and becomes something far bigger, an institutional business decision made at the front office level. But the reporting issue may only be one piece of the story. Because the timing of Clark's absence also overlaps with viral sideline footage from the previous game. Footage showing head coach Stephanie White and assistant coach Bon January in a visibly tense interaction with Caitlin Clark. Clark's reaction, immediate, emotional, and forceful, didn't look like normal in-game communication. It looked like a player reaching a breaking point. And when a superstar with Clark's value has a public sideline incident like that, the standard organizational response in professional sports is usually de-escalation and damage control, not further controversy.
According to the Indiana Fever. Now, somebody sent me this photo of Caitlin Clark at practice yesterday. And this photo right here shows Caitlin Clark's demeanor yesterday at practice. So as you guys can see there, it's almost like they're making Caitlin Clark take a timeout. Not in game terms, but...
Then came the practice photos. Images from the Fever facility in the days surrounding the incident painted a picture that many fans immediately noticed. Caitlin Clark appeared visually isolated from teammates and staff, detached from the normal flow of team activity. That matters because athletes dealing with legitimate injuries are typically integrated into modified workouts and recovery protocols alongside trainers and coaches. What people saw in those images didn't resemble that environment. And when you combine the visual separation, the sideline confrontation, and the apparent reporting inconsistency, the precautionary rest explanation suddenly becomes harder to fully accept at face value. As for the basketball side of things, yes, the Fever beat the Portland Fire without Clark. Critics immediately pointed to the win as evidence the team might somehow function better without her dominating the offense. But context matters. Portland is an expansion franchise still building its roster, defensive structure, and overall identity. Beating a first-year team without your biggest star doesn't automatically prove the lineup is superior. It may simply prove the opponent wasn't strong enough to expose the weaknesses that normally would have surfaced against elite competition. The atmosphere inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse during that game created another problem entirely. The attendance numbers looked strong on paper, but the actual energy in the building told a very different story. The crowd noise, the engagement, the overall intensity, it didn't resemble the atmosphere of a nationally relevant WNBA showcase. It felt more like fans realizing the product they paid to see wasn't actually the one being delivered. And that's dangerous territory for any professional franchise because trust between a team and its fan base is fragile. Once fans start believing they were misled, rebuilding that relationship becomes extremely difficult. It requires accountability, transparency, and consistent communication. So far, critics argue those things have been largely absent from the Fever organization. Meanwhile, Stephanie White's own public comments have only added more fuel to the controversy. Different interviews produced different explanations regarding Clark's health, availability, and lineup management. And under league policy, the issue isn't just the official injury report, it's also the consistency of public statements made by team personnel. Contradictions across media appearances can create a documented trail the league office may eventually feel obligated to review.